Jurassic World is directed by Colin Trevorrow and stars Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard. Now, it is the sequel to Jurassic Park. There are two other sequels to Jurassic Park: The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3, but I don't think Jurassic World really takes them into those two films into its kind of canon. It's just a straight up follow up from the events of Jurassic Park. Now, the thing is, Jurassic Park, when it came out, it was a fantastic film, still really holds up to this day. It was revolutionary in terms of special effects. It just had that real Spielberg feel to it in terms of spectacle and things like that. Now, the problem is that the two sequels, The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3, weren't really on par with that. They were, all things considered, pretty poor films. I haven't seen Jurassic Park 3, but it is widely regarded to be a very poor film, so I have no reason to doubt that view. And I have seen The Lost World of Jurassic Park, and I did not like that film. Okay, so I feel as though Jurassic Park has yet to have had a good sequel, and when in the build-up, in the anticipation to Jurassic World, that's what I was hoping it would be. The sequel Jurassic Park deserves, but in the kind of marketing and things like that, a lot of people have negative reactions to the trailers. They thought, oh, a lot of people were saying this film isn't going to be very good, so I have to say I went in with realistic expectations. I wasn't expecting something on par with Jurassic Park, but that would be very hard, but what I was expecting was something better than the other two sequels, and just a fun summer blockbuster with dinosaurs, So let's start with the strengths, okay? Now, obviously, in Jurassic World, the plot is that the theme park which John Hammond imagined in the original film has finally opened up, and for me, that is that's one of the big strengths of the film, is the way the theme park Jurassic World is imagined. I think that there's kind of a lot of detail in the mise en scène, the sets. I think it's a very well imagined vision of what that kind of thing would look like. I think if you had a theme park like that in real life, then it would look something like that, and I think it's very immersive in that aspect, obviously, so you can then believe in the world and get invested and all that kind of thing. So I think that is definitely a big strength of the film. Jurassic World is well imagined. Okay, so let's talk about performances. Now, the two big leads in this film are Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard. Now, I think in general, those guys do a pretty solid job at kind of making you believe in these characters and making you engage with their characters. I think Chris Pratt especially, he is really engaging in his lead role. Obviously, Chris Pratt, he's a great actor in things like Guardians of the Galaxy. He's just made for these kind of roles, so I think it was a great job of the casting guys to get Chris Pratt into the role. Now, there are two kids in the film, well, one kid and one kind of teenager around my age, but I think when you have young people in films like this, they tend to be kind of annoying because they're not really great at acting, and kind of their roles are just supposed to be for this cute comic relief kind of thing. Now, obviously, in this film, kind of the children's eyes are kind of meant to be, you're seeing it through their eyes because they're like being awed, while the younger kid, he's like in awe of the spectacle, and that's supposed to be how the viewer is feeling. But I think in general, the performances of the younger guys were very well done. They weren't irritating at all, which obviously, it's pretty rare for that to happen, so when it does happen, you got to give credit to it, And obviously, when you come into a film like this, you're not really interested in the narrative structure and the character arcs. What you kind of come to see is cool action spectacle. So that was kind of the key thing of the film, which the film had to do well in order to be considered successful and enjoyable for the people watching. Now, I think in general, this film did. It had great action set pieces, which, in these days where pretty much everything has been done in terms of action, it's hard to kind of be original. So even though these action sequences weren't necessarily original, they were well realized in the way they were done, even with elements such as the special effects. You believed what was happening, and I feel like a big help in these action scenes was the music which kind of added a whole, another level. Now, obviously, this is an original soundtrack for the film, not necessarily even though it does use some bits of John Williams' soundtrack, it is pretty much a wholly original soundtrack, and I think it works really well and it just adds, it makes these action set pieces even more compelling, and there's just a real level of excitement in these action pieces, so I think that works and adds a lot to the film. Okay, so we talked about the strengths, let's talk about the weaknesses, because let's be frank, no one was expecting this film to be perfect, and it isn't. It has some pretty big problems, and I would say the majority of those problems are problems with the narrative. Okay, this film is very narratively flawed, so let's talk about the characters first. For this film's plot, for the way this film's plot goes on, there are a lot of characters required. Okay, now that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are lots of films where there are lots of characters, like let's say Lord of the Rings, for example. Lord of the Rings has lots of characters, but it works despite that. Okay, but this film doesn't deal with its lots of characters very well. For instance, there are certain characters which you kind of think they're going to play major roles in the plot, and then you don't see them. There's a lot less screen time for certain characters that you would have liked. Vincent D'Onofrio's, however you say his name, character. He's kind of not very an interesting character, and I guess he is kind of meant to be the main human villain of the film, but he's just not very interesting. There are certain characters where you can just tell instantly, oh, I know what's going to happen to you. It's pretty predictable. So I think the film certainly suffers from those narrative kind of issues. There are certain characters you'd like to see further explored, but you can't because of time limitations and things like that. Now, there's another problem in this film with the characters, and that's that some of the time their kind of motives, actions, decisions don't really make sense in the context of the film or what's going on. Like, for example, with the kids, with the younger guys, there's one scene in particular which is just like really out of place in terms of their characterization and like their narrative arcs, and that scene just felt so forced, just about a subplot which was like never really explored again. And there are certain times in the film one time in particular in the film where characters do something and it just feels like, why are you doing that now? That's a bit inappropriate. And that kind of moves me on to my second point, in that in this film there's a forced love subplot between Bryce Dallas Howard and Chris Pratt's character, and in my mind that really just doesn't work. It's not interesting, you don't care about it. I think their relationship works better when that isn't really an issue that's being addressed, when they're just kind of having a banter, if you know what I mean. I feel like just adding a romantic subplot, it just feels so forced. I think the film would just been better if those characters had just been friends, and the film would just continued without it, without feeling generic, would actually been a bit original, Okay, so obviously this film is kind of, it pays homage a lot to Jurassic Park in kind of a lot of different details. There's one scene in particular which pretty blatantly is kind of trying to pay homage to the original film, which obviously, it's nice in sequels to kind of see respect paid to the original film, but the thing is, when you look at the plot of Jurassic World and the plot of Jurassic Park, there are kind of a lot of parallels, a lot of similar things, plot ideas are running through. Now, that could be considered, it's just paying homage, but on the other hand, it could be considered to be a tad unoriginal and just ripping it off, and there are moments which is just like, wait, that's straight out of Jurassic Park, even though kind of the plot, even though those moments kind of make sense within the plot, it just feels a bit like, oh, this is just a moment which is paying homage to Jurassic Park rather than being like its own thing, if you know what I mean. So even though these moments are kind of nice, they could have been less obvious, a little more, subtle, and I think that would have just given a lot more to the film. Okay, so all in all, I really enjoyed Jurassic World. I think it's a better film than The Lost World, and it's probably a better film than Jurassic Park 3, but then again, that isn't really saying much in terms of quality, But I went in and I just really enjoyed this film. It is a great surface film because it has good action, it has fun performances, and if you go in and that's what you're looking for, that's what you'll get, yeah? But if you take a closer look at kind of the narrative structure and characterization and things like that, that is a bit of a mess, and that just kind of makes the film a lot less interesting and probably a lot less memorable. So it'll do what it says on the tin, but is it gonna have as much of a legacy as the first Jurassic Park? I don't think so. And another thing which I didn't really mention, towards the end of the film, the action gets a bit absurd. There's one moment in particular in which I was just like, oh come on now, that is ridiculous. Okay, so all in all, yeah, really enjoyed this film. Huge narrative problems. I would give it a 7 out of 10. Okay, so thank you for watching my review of Jurassic World. If you want to see more of this kind of thing, please like, support my channel and subscribe. I know that's a bit of a generic thing to say, but I mean it. I want to be able to do this YouTuber review thing properly to, kind of get experience, you know what I mean? So, thank you, and goodbye.